My name is Roland Winters, and I'd like to tell you the story of Erberts Appy Birthday. Now, the story of Erberts Appy Birthday happened in an old town in England away across the ocean. It was a pretty little old town with funny red brick houses and an old church all covered with ivy. Also, an inn. The name of the inn was the White Ox, and the name of the pretty little old town was Erberts on the Wallaby. Now, I know that's a silly-sounding name, but honestly, that was the name. Erberts was the town, and the Wallaby was a river. Not a very big river, and not a very little river. Just a river. Well, in Erberts on the Wallaby, at the White Ox Inn, lived an English bulldog whose name was Herbert. Although he pronounced it Erbert, so I suppose that's what we'd better call it, too. Herbert was big and sort of yellowish, with a pushed-in face and the biggest feet you ever saw. And on top of that, he had trouble with his breathing. But he was nice. Oh, very nice. And quite clean, too. So one bright sunny day in May, which is very much like our month of May, even if it is away across the ocean in England, Herbert was standing outside the White Ox Inn when he saw a dachshund come padding up the lane. Well, Herbert had never seen a dachshund before, and to say that he was surprised is putting it mildly. Did you ever see a dachshund? Well, it's a dog, of course, but it really looks more like a Frankfurter sausage with 4 feet and a tail. As I said, Herbert was surprised. He started to speak, but just then he had trouble with his breathing, and all that would come out was... The dachshund heard this noise and stopped. Then he looked at Herbert, and Herbert looked at he, and then they both smiled. Did you ever see an English bulldog smile? Well, he's got enough wrinkles already, but when he smiles, boy, even his eyes disappear in all the wrinkles. This made the dachshund laugh. But then, realizing that that was not polite, he pulled himself together, and in his best English, which was not very good because a dachshund speaks only German as a rule, he said, "Good morning, friend. My name is Conrad. What's yours?" Well, Herbert fairly beamed at this. And after wheezing twice, he said, "My name's Herbert, me lad." "Herbert," said Conrad the dachshund. "Herbert? How do you spell that?" And Herbert wheezed and said, "Why, Herbert. Herbert. Herbert." "But that spells Herbert," said little Conrad. "Yes, Herbert, that's what I said," said Herbert. 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 Can't you understand English? Well, when Herbert said, "Can't you understand English?" little Conrad looked sad, which is a very easy way for a dachshund to look. And when Herbert saw that maybe he'd hurt Conrad's feelings, he used a milder tone when he asked, "What language do they speak in your country, Conrad?" Now Conrad was happy again, and he answered, "Well, I come from Switzerland, and there they speak 3 different languages." "Well," said Herbert, "isn't one of them English?" And Conrad looked sad and answered, "Isn't it?" "You mean it isn't," said Herbert. And Conrad said, "Yeah, that's what said I, isn't it?" Just then, down the lane came a great, big, strong, beautiful Russian wolfhound. And when he saw Conrad and Herbert chatting on the walk in front of the White Ox Inn in the pretty little old town of Erberts on the Wallaby, with the little red brick houses and the old church all covered with ivy, he said, "Tovarich," just like that. "Tovarich." Well, you can well believe that Herbert and Conrad were amazed. And I think little Conrad was even somewhat frightened. Anyway, he edged a little closer to Herbert. But Herbert wasn't frightened, not a bit of it. Not Herbert. He let out one of his best wheezes, like this. And said, "Here, what's all this? Speak up, me lad, and remember you're talking to Englishmen." And then he remembered little Conrad, or at least one Englishman. And the Russian wolfhound said, "How do you do, Englishman, and you too, little one? My name is Tobachnikov. I come from Russia, and Tovarich in Russian language means comrade." And then he beamed. because he was a very nice fellow, too, when you got to know him. In less time than it takes to tell, the three of them became fast friends because they all were really the nicest kind of dogs, and quite clean, too. So after chatting for a while, what did they do but decide to have a picnic? Herbert, because he lived at the White Ox Inn, brought most of the heavier food: roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, and tea. The English always drink tea. Conrad brought an Apfelstrudel that he baked himself, and Tobachnikov brought borscht, which is a kind of Russian soup, and some caviar. I'm not sure what that is because I'm an American and I've always eaten at child's restaurants where they don't have caviar. Well, they packed their lunch carefully, and then the three friends started for the beach to have their picnic. Conrad the Dachshund led the way, then came Herbert, and finally Tobachnikov, the Russian wolfhound. Everything was going fine, and Herbert and Conrad and Tobachnikov were in the best of good spirits when suddenly it happened. Trouble. That's the way it always happens, suddenly and without warning. And do you know what caused the trouble? One of the worst things that can come to a dog: temptation. Yes, temptation. That's wanting to do something he shouldn't do. Now, you wouldn't believe that in a nice little old town like Erberts on the Wallaby, on a fine sunny day in May, with the little red brick houses and the old church all covered with ivy, you wouldn't believe that with everything going so nicely for Conrad, Herbert, and Tobachnikov, with all that good food and starting for the beach for a picnic, you wouldn't believe that temptation could strike them. But it did, and do you know what it was? It was a plum pie, freshly baked and sitting on the windowsill of the Widow Beckwith's house to cool. Just think of it. With all the good food they had, even with the beautiful Apfelstrudel that Conrad had baked for their dessert, they were tempted to steal that plum pie. Tempted to? They did steal it. Oh, they knew it was wrong, but Conrad said, oh boy, that looks awful good. And Herbert wheezed and said, me lad, you never said a truer word. It looks delicious. And Tobachnikov said, well, what are we waiting for? And it was too bad, because up to then they'd been such nice dogs. But that was all there was to it. Temptation overcame them, and they stole Mrs. Beckwith's fresh-baked plum pie right off her windowsill on that bright May morning on the street in the pretty little old town of Erberts on the Wallaby, with its pretty red brick houses and the old church all covered with ivy. Now, here's what happened next, and you'll see why it was so unfortunate that they met temptation. Conrad and Herbert and Tobachnikov ran as fast as their 12 legs would carry them for the beach, and so that nobody would see them running with Mrs. Beckwith's plum pie, they took a shortcut across the marsh that lay between them and the beach. The marsh was very swampy and wet. There was a lot of quicksand in it, too, which is very dangerous because it pulls you right down if you happen to step in it by accident. Oh, there was a path across the marsh, but Conrad and Herbert and Tobachnikov were running so fast with their stolen plum pie that they didn't watch where they were going. And the first thing any of them knew, Conrad and Herbert had run right off the path and were already starting to sink down in the quicksand. In fact, little Conrad with his short legs was already way down, but Herbert's great big feet kept him a little bit higher. Tobachnikov was the only one who had been able to stop and was still on the path. Well, things were pretty bad. Poor little Conrad was yelling, help, help me, I'm sinking. And Herbert was bellowing, here, what's all this? I can't move. I believe I'm going down. Here, you Tobach, whatever your name is, help us. Well, Tobachnikov, who was a good fellow, shouted, Tovarich, in this emergency we shall dispense with formality. Just call me Toby. Now what shall I do? Pull us out of this here quicksand and hurry up about it or we're both goners, howled Herbert. And all poor Conrad could do was just gurgle a little, for he was almost under by then. Well, Tobachnikov took off his coat and passed one end of it to Herbert. Then Herbert reached out and got Conrad by the tail, and Tobachnikov, who was very strong, pulled with all his might, and after some terrible pulling and hauling, with one last mighty heave, he succeeded in pulling his two friends safely onto the dry path. The three of them lay there for a while, just panting, except Herbert, who was wheezing too. And a fine mess they were, clothes all muddy and torn, roast beef, strudel, caviar, all lost in the quicksand. Well, they were three mighty sad dogs, hungry, tired, and pretty scared, too, because it was getting dark. They plodded slowly and painfully home to the White Ox Inn. And when they finally got there, who should meet them at the door but Erbert's Irish cousin from Ireland, an Irish setter named Pat. Pat had come to visit Erbert just at that time, and after Erbert introduced Pat to his friends, Pat said, "Erbert, me boy, I've here a bit of a present for you. 'Tis not much as presents go, but 'tis all I could afford, times being hard and the English landlords being what they be. Take it, carry it in good health, and a happy birthday to you." And with that he handed Erbert a beautiful blackthorn shillelagh, which is a rough, heavy stick the Irish sometimes use for walking. Erbert was astounded. He said, "Birthday? Birthday! Cool! So it is my birthday, and I'd clean forgot about it." Of course, they all wished Erbert a happy birthday, and then came the final blow. Pat said, "Yes, 'tis your birthday, and do you know what, Cousin Erbert? Knowing it was your birthday, the Widdy Beckwith baked you a beautiful plum pie for a present. And what do you think happened? Some rascally scalawag of a low-down, no-good thief stole it right off her window-sill where the poor old soul had set it out to cool." Well, when they heard that, you never saw three dogs that looked any sillier or any sadder than Erbert and Conrad and Tobachnikov. Here they had gone and stolen a plum pie that would have been theirs anyway, or at least Erbert's. Erbert wheezed, Conrad looked terribly sad even for him, and Tobachnikov scratched himself gently under his fourth rib on the right-hand side. And then they suddenly all remembered they hadn't eaten a thing all day, and that made them feel even more miserable. At that, Pat burst out laughing and said, "Ho, ho, 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 me boys, you're a sad-looking lot, and you deserved what you got. But a birthday comes but once a year, so look here." And with that, he threw open the dining room door, and there was a table set for four with all the good things you can think of to eat, and a big birthday cake with candles, too. "Eat hearty, me lads," shouted Pat, "and a happy birthday, Cousin Erbert, and may you never fall under the spell of temptation." And with that, he gave a broad wink, because he knew all the time who stole the plum pie. He had seen them. Now, what do you think of that?